Okay, good evening, ladies. Thank you very much for joining me. We got the technology to work. So tonight's shir was entitled, what was it? Great miracles happen here. If I happened there or happened here, what was the exact title?
Happened there.
Great miracles happen there. Okay. So, okay, that's it. The shir's finished. I got the wrong title. No, just kidding. Right. Great miracles happen there. And we're going to try and discuss that. So what is a great miracle and what's a small miracle? Okay. So the question is, what we have Chanukah, and Chanukah seems to be, on the one hand, a lovely holiday. On the other hand, if you think about the nest that happened on Chanukah, you'd be hard-pressed to find another nest within the entire Jewish calendar that seems smaller than that nest. Right? What happened? The Jews battled, they won, they come into the Beis Hamikdash, they didn't have any oil, they looked for oil, they found oil, and the oil burned for 8 days. That's wonderful, that's lovely, that's really lovely. Do you know what I mean? But put that on the same scale with Yetzias Mitzrayim, or getting the Torah, or being saved at Purim, or the Ananei HaKover that enveloped the Jewish people for 40 years. That's a miracle. You look at the Neras Chanukah, you say, yeah, you know what? We had oil that was supposed to burn for 1 day and it burned for 8 days. And for that, we're going to have an 8-day Yom Tov, which we say Hallel, full Hallel for 8 days. It sounds almost a little bit over the top. Do you think we should maybe have 1 day Chanukah? We're going to have all the donuts. It'd be a lot easier for our weight as well if you only had 1 day Chanukah instead of 8. So recently speaking to somebody who's a dietitian who told me that she thinks 1 donut has about 700 calories. So 700 calories means that's about a third of your calorie intake for the day is 1 donut. Now, I knew people that used to have donuts on Chanukah. A friend of mine tried this. He says, you know, on Chanukah, you have to keep going. So on the first night, it's 1 night. On the second night, it's so he did this with donuts. On the first day, he had 1 donut. On the second day, he had 2 donuts. I don't even know how on the 8th day, he ate 8 donuts. You know, you had to take his arm, you squeeze it, oil came out. It was just, you think to yourself, what is this miracle of Chanukah and what are we celebrating on Chanukah? So I'd like to discuss this together with an idea on the Pasha that I heard from this shir is sort of a combination of something I heard from a fellow by the name of Rabbi Malach, who is a Batchen as well as a Darshan in America, and together with Chaim Friedlander in the Sifsei Chaim as well. So we're going to try to put this together. So you have in this week's Pasha a very interesting bit. It says as follows. Straight. Vayeshev Yaakov, Beretz Megurei Aviv. Yaakov lived in the land of his father's Beretz Canaan. Let me see if I can pull it out. Even it'll be easier if I even get to see it inside. Yaakov wanted to live in the land of his forefathers and the land of Canaan, and that's what we start off with. So Rashi tells us a very strange introduction right at the beginning of the Pasha. So first Rashi says, Bikesh Yaakov Leishav Shava. Yaakov Avinu wanted to live in peace. Yaakov Avinu was not allowed to live in peace. Kodesh Baruch Hu sent him right away the problems with Yosef. But then he brings the other medrash, and the medrash says that Yaakov Avinu was actually quite afraid. He says he's looking at what's going on out there. He looks at what happened with Esav in last week's Pasha. We read about Esav and all his children and all the different princes that he has and the royalty and the monarchy and all the kings that have been created from Esav. And he thinks to himself, my goodness me, how in the world am I ever going to be able to overcome Esav and all of his people? So he says there was a mashal. He says, Yaakov Avinu, don't worry about it. There's a mashal that we can tell you about this. What's the mashal? It says that Yaakov Avinu, there was a bikesh. There was this Pechomi, which is a fellow who is, so I'm just looking for it. It just doesn't, tonight, technology and I are not really getting on so well. Not doing what I wanted to do. Okay, doesn't matter. Right? There was a Pechomi, which is a fellow who is a silversmith or an ironmonger. And this ironmonger is busy and he's, here we go. Thank you. Right. So it says you have this fellow with a lot of flax that's coming in through a road, and he's got his camels loaded up with flax. And you have a fellow over there, Hapechomi Tomo, and there was an ironmonger that's asking himself the question, how are we going to get all this flax through this road? It's so big. You know, sometimes you see a lorry driving down, it says wide load, or it's sort of a little bit too high, and you think to yourself, how's I going to get through all the bridges, et cetera, et cetera. You don't know how it's going to make through. So it was one clever person who says to him, what are you talking about? One spark from your bellow, it's going to burn the entire thing. So to Yaakov Avinu saw all the different people that was there before, were written in Esau's family, and he said to himself, who's going to be able to conquer them all? So therefore he says, Eila Taltus Yaakov Yosef. The pasuk says, these are the children of Yaakov, these are the happenings of Yaakov. Yosef was 17 years old, and the pasuk says, V'hoya beis Yaakov Eish, Yaakov will be a fire, beis Yosef v'hava, and Yosef will be a flame. Beis Esau l'kash, and beis Esau will turn into a piece of straw and be burned up entirely. One little spark comes out from Yosef, and it burns up the entire thing. That is what we see over here in the beginning of the Medrash in this week's Pasha. And the question is, what is that supposed to mean? I mean, have you ever heard something so strange before? You have two different people that are talking to each other about, says, oh, look at this. There's so much stuff over here. Look, imagine a guy said to you, like, I got all these books. I'm not sure I'm going to fit all these books in all my svarm trunks in my house. He says, don't worry about it. Bit of fire, don't worry. It's all gone. You'd say that's a chacham? Is that, please remind me not to ask you to help me with removals next time I need to move my things from one house to another. I don't want to burn this stuff. What's going on over here? I'm going to burn it, a little flame, a little spark, and that brings it all down. What is that supposed to mean? Another question that he speaks about in his shir over there is the idea of Yaakov Avinu and Esau being called B'nai HaGadol and B'nai HaKatan. And Pashas told us Esau is referred to again, Esau B'nai HaGadol, his older son, his big son, and Yaakov was B'nai HaKatan, his little son. So I know that I have a boy who's 18 and a boy who's 7. So my boy who's 18 is my big boy, and my boy who's 7 is my little boy. And it makes sense because 11, 12 years apart. It's about as far apart as I was from my brother. I only had one brother. I had 4 sisters and one brother. My brother was born sort of, I was already nearly 12 when he was born. That was a great simcha for me. Baruch Hashem, I finally had a brother. But I was a big boy and he was a little boy. But if you look at Yaakov and Esau, how much time was it between Yaakov and Esau being born? In reality, nothing. Esau came out, and what was Yaakov doing? Holding on to his heel. So that Yaakov is what? 3 minutes younger, 5 minutes younger, call it 10 minutes. Let's be really generous. Call it 10 minutes younger. It's my big boy, it's my little boy. 10 minutes apart. They're twins. Well, you have big boy and little boy. Why is one referred to as the big one, one's referred to as a little one? So that's as far as the Pasha is concerned. Now, I want to just understand also over here the difference between Yavan and the Jews. What does Yavan stand for? So Yavan was for culture, progress, etc., etc. So what was so bad with that? Why is that so bad? Are we as Jews against progress? We're against culture, we're against all these things. We like to stay in the Middle Ages. None of us came here by horse and cart today. None of us go to the Urwell every time we need water. We turn on the tap and water comes out. So we're all for progress. And yet, Yavan comes and says, we want progress. And the Jews fight against this. They fight it vehemently. So how does that work? How does that make sense? So I'd like to try and understand this with the following idea that this Rabbi Malach brought in the Pasha, which will then move on from that to explain that also within the confines of the ideas of Chanukah. So he says that within halacha, there is oftentimes a difference that is made between two different things, and they're called eichus and kamos. Eichus is quality. Eichus is, yes, quality, and kamos is quantity. So the mashal that I heard, I thought it was a great mashal, says you go into a shop, Toys R Us, Smith's, Toys R Us is all over the shop already. You go into Smith's, whatever it is, you walk inside, you see a shop. I remember when I was a kid, we walked into Toys R Us. First time my parents took me to Toys R Us, I was in New Jersey. My grandmother lived in New Jersey, in West Orange, and there was in Livingston, New Jersey, which is the next town over from West Orange, had a Toys R Us. And my mother took me to Toys R Us, and I looked and I was like, what is this, paradise? Look how many toys are here. Look how many games. There's rows and rows of games and of toys, and every imaginable toy that you could find, you would find over there in Toys R Us. You're like, this is unbelievable. Look at the shop. You have this shop. It's aisles and aisles. And you're very, very impressed with that shop. Next door to the Toys R Us is a Beaverbrook's, right? Little shop. One window, not like 6, 8 units next to each other. One window. What's in the window? 2 or 3 diamonds, 2 or 3 watches. You come inside, they have a tiny little display. You want to see something, they take you into a room and they show it to you, like, here, have a look at this one, look at that one. So when you're a kid, you look at those two shops and you think to yourself, Nebuch Beaverbrooks, Nebuch. I mean, look at them. Look at Toys R Us. Look at this big shop. Look how many toys they have. You look at this Beaverbrooks, this tiny little place. It's got what? A few little rings and a few little watches. That Beaverbrooks packs in, one little Beaverbrooks packs in the whole Toys R Us with all the schmonzes from Japan and China. Yeah, you have 1,000,001 little toys that are worthless. One little diamond, or one, even the big diamond that you would find. How big is the biggest diamond you've seen? 2 carats, 3 carats, 5 carats. What's a 5-carat diamond? Tens of thousands of pounds. But what is it? This big? It's nothing. But because it's perfect, it's so small. That's the eichus. That's the quality versus the quantity. You walk into Toys R Us, you'll see quantity. You look around, you see another schmonzer for 20 pounds and another mishigas for 10 pounds and these fidget spinners and this toy and this bike and this electronics. It's all 20, 30 pounds here, there, everywhere. You go next door to this tiny little Beaverbrooks. Every item that you pull out is tens of thousands of pounds. It's a whole different story. So it says that's big and small. And so he says we look at big and small over here also in ideas of potential. He looks at big and small and he says, imagine you had 2 guys in the Bikur Cholim room in Hope Hospital. I was just in Hope Hospital today. I had to visit somebody and I went over there to the room of the Bikur Cholim and you meet two guys are meeting up over there. And one guy says to the other, how are you doing? He says, oh, terrible, terrible. He says, what's wrong? He says, my father. So I said, your father, he's 96 years old. He's been lying in bed for 3 days. All he does is krechzing. Whatever you give him, he can't hold it down. He's incontinent, unfortunately. He has to have it's just terrible. It's just a terrible, terrible matzav. I don't know what's going to be. And the other fellow says to him, I got the same thing with my son. Really, you have the same thing with your son? I'm so happy, so sorry to hear that. He goes, yeah, my wife gave birth 3-4 days ago. He's not moved out of bed in the last 3 or 4 days. Whatever we give him to eat, he can't keep it down. He's also incontinent. All he does is krechs all day long. What's going to be? What would you say to the guy? What's the matter with you? What's wrong with you? Mitzvah Hashem, the little one will be big. Mitzvah Hashem, he'll get out. Oy boy, he's going to get out of all these problems. You'll wish you just sit down for a minute. He'll be here, there, and everywhere. He'll be tearing through your house, ripping the house apart. So you got the house, and you got to. So what? He doesn't walk. Don't worry about it. He can't keep anything down. Mitzvah Hashem, he'll learn Mitzvah Hashem, be able to keep down food. He's krechzing all day long. He'll learn how to talk soon. He doesn't, he can't control his own bodily functions, and Mitzvah Hashem will be fine. You get 2 years old, 3 years old, they'll figure it out. They'll teach him, etc., etc. You got a whole life in front of you. The 96-year-old, you say, oh, never. That's a terrible situation. That's a serious situation. Who knows what's going to be with a fellow? So that's Godel and Cotton. The Godel is big because you say to yourself, the problems or the issues that you see over here, once you're at that stage of Godel, there's no going back. It's very hard to undo all of those issues. It's very hard to add more potential over there because you're more or less at the end of the road over there. Whereas the Cotton got all this potential ahead of him. You might see somebody small. You might say, look at this little kid. He can't do anything. Yeah, now he's a little kid. Right? I look at the pictures of my little children. Sometimes you go back into the albums, especially nowadays when you have photos on your computer. You can see 10, 15 years of pictures and you can look through them in an hour. You can go, instead of taking another album, you just run through them very quickly. And you look at the picture and you see, is that what he used to be like? You don't even remember what your kids used to be like when they were small, how cute they were and all the mishigas that they had. Today you speak to them, they speak to you like adults. It's a whole different story. It's a very, very different child. And that's because of all of the latent potential that was in there. And so therefore, that's what's going on over here. You have the Godel and the Cotton. You have Yaakov Avinu is the Cotton. Esav is the Godel. But even though Esav is the Godel, who has more quality left in them? Esav might be the man that you look at and look at him. This guy looks strong and he's got a full beard and he looks like he can fend for himself. And Nebuch Yaakov's a yeshiva man and he's sitting there and you think to yourself, Nebuch, this guy can't fend for himself. He has to sit in Goyal and he doesn't, But who's the Godel? Who's the Cotton? So we look at the Godel, Esav, the Starker. Yaakov is the Cotton. But what we're trying to say over here is it's really the other way around. Yaakov might be the cotton now, but being cotton now is because he's got that much more potential in him that's going to blossom, is going to turn into something. Esav is the Gadol. He's finished. You're done. You're not going to get any more out of Esav. This is it. A bit of muscle, a bit of brawn, no brain. That's it. That's all you're going to get. And so that's what makes Esav the Gadol and Yaakov the cotton. Yaakov looks at all of these alufim. Yaakov looks at all of these different people, these different princes, everything else. And he thinks to himself, my goodness gracious, look how many people. How are we ever going to get through this? How are we ever going to manage this? And the Rebbeinu Shem says to him, Bechami zeh. Why do we call the guy a Bechami? He's an ironmonger. Because many times, unfortunately, many people have inside them, they actually have all of the tools that they need to overcome the problem if they just believe that they could overcome the problem. Unfortunately, we don't believe that we can overcome the problem, so we always worry about it. But really, we could overcome the problem if we knew that we dig deep. And what the Rabbi Shem is saying to Yaakov now, you look at all of the people over here and you say to yourself, there's so many. How do we overcome all these people? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you're so worried about the numbers? Don't be so worried about the numbers. Nothing to worry about. Do you know why? Because you have the eichus. You have the quality necessary to fight him. You might not have the quantity necessary to fight him, but you certainly have the quality necessary to fight him. So you look at this whole big amount of flax and you say to yourself, how are we going to deal with all of this? And the Chacham says, what do you mean, how are you going to deal with it? One little spark from you and whoosh, the whole thing is gone. So you're worried how you're going to deal with this? You don't know how you as Yaakov Avinu are going to be able to fight off Esav, fend off Esav, and be able to come out victorious on the other side? It's very easy. Nothing to worry about. You know how it happens? One little spark from you. Yosef turns that spark into a flame. The flame goes, and within a few minutes, the whole thing is gone. That's what Yosef is. That's what Yaakov is being told over here. You aren't seeing it right. You think somehow it'll be impossible for you to overcome this. But that's only because you're looking at sheer numbers. In us, by us in Yiddishkeit, numbers don't impress us. We're not impressed by numbers. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu even says it. Not because you're so many. HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't choose you because you're so many. You're the smallest of all the people. So we're the smallest of all the people. Look around. For such a small people, have we left a legacy for the world? Boy, oh boy, have we left a legacy for the world. Whether it is a moral legacy as Jews, whether it is a intellectual legacy, as people who have brought so much intellect to the world, whether it's a financial legacy. A lot of things were created. Jews created some of the first financial institutions. So Rothschild created a bank, sent 4 of his kids to 4 big cities in Europe, and he said, you know what, Yankel, next time there's a bar mitzvah in town, I'll bring the money, you bring the money, we'll sort it out already. You lay out for me, I'll lay out for you, we'll sort it out later. And that's what they did. And they created this banking institution because we can work together as a family. Yeah, okay, Yankel, I know, I'll come. What do I owe you? 1,000 pounds, 10,000 pounds, 1,000,000 pounds, I'll bring it. Fine. Say it. When's the next bar mitzvah? 2 weeks' time, I'll be there. We'll work it out. We left the world such a legacy. And we're still leaving the world a legacy. Because we're so many? No, not because we're so many. Because of the eichos, because of the quality that we put into the world. And now let's move on to Yovan. Yovan is the other way around. Yovan, as Rav Chaim Friedlander speaks about it, very much resembles modern day science. Modern day science, unfortunately, really unfortunately, is the biggest bunch of arrogant people out there. They are. And unfortunately, when the Rabbi Shem finally sent them a lesson, they didn't learn their lesson. The biggest lesson modern science has had in the last 50 years, probably, COVID. Yeah? Did you watch how we ran around like headless chickens in COVID? Did anybody ever think back and say to themselves, that was just such a crazy time? The doctors had no idea what to do. The scientists had no idea what to do. People were dying left, right, and center. You were allowed to meet. Everything seemed arbitrary. It was literally, we live this weird arbitrary life where people just made up things as you went along. And for some people it made sense, and some people it didn't make sense, and some people were more equal than others. And a lot of the things we made didn't even make sense. We just did them to save the NHS. We just didn't want to overwhelm the NHS. So we shut all the schools and we shut all the businesses and we threw billions of pounds at people just not to overwhelm the NHS. That's really what happened. Do you remember the early days of COVID when we all wore gloves and we all wore face masks and everybody walked into the shop? You took a spray, you disinfected it, and you went, you got everything. You didn't stand next to anybody. And then once you were finished shopping, you just quickly brought the stuff home. Lots of people left the stuff out for 3 days. Then after 3 days only did they bring it inside and they disinfected it, et cetera, et cetera. 3 months later, we found out all of that is just rubbish. It's nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Don't have to do that. Jimmy, for 3 months, we've all been buying plastic gloves for no reason. Whoever had plastic gloves during that time made a fortune. A fortune. On what? On a virus that doesn't actually pass on through touch. How about that? I mean, I meet people nowadays. It's the most ridiculous thing. I meet people in shul, and they sit in shul without a mask and say hello, and then you want to wish them good Shabbos, they go like this. And I just want to say to them, you're not really up on the science, are you? Science has gotten rid of this elbow thing a long time ago. We already don't believe that touching actually leads. This is an airborne virus, not a virus that it's transferred by touch. You want to bang my elbow, bang my elbow. But if you're really worried, why don't you wear a mask? People it's become madness. And everybody's like, I feel comfortable with this. I don't feel comfortable with that. I'll go to Tesco. I might come to shul, but I won't sit next to anybody. We had all these weird things. Give you another example. Do you remember this? We all had Tesco. You had an entrance and an exit, and it was very, very particular. You had to go in at the entrance, and you had to walk out of the exit. In the shop, mingle as much as you wanted to. What do you mean? Like, just at the entrance, COVID can kill you? As soon as they hit the cucumbers, COVID knows there's cucumbers here. I'm not going to go anywhere near you because you're near the cucumbers. And nappies. That as well. I can't come anywhere near you, nappies. By the till's good. Oh, you're at the exit. Quick, I'm coming. Sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry. I'm sorry. I gave you a shock there. That's it. Do apologize. Right? But it was just crazy. We were just craziness. Your son told me, he said he's sitting on a plane and this woman is making him crazy. He says, you got to put your mask over your nose. Put your mask over your nose. Put your mask over your nose. An hour later, the meal comes. She pulls down her mask, sits there for 45 minutes eating. I just want to say, lady, you think when you're chewing, COVID is not going to come to you because you're chewing? Like, what exactly is your problem? Why are you making me sugar? And as soon as the food came, you have no problem pulling down your mask. Either it's a problem, it's not a problem. But what's the matter with you? Right? We all went totally bonkers, crazy. And then we said, we created a vaccine. Oh, but okay, everybody has a vaccine. You have a vaccine, you'll be fine. No, you'll be fine for 3 months. Have a second vaccine. Okay, now comes Delta. We don't really know if the vaccine can work. No, but Delta's okay. But Omicron, no, not Omicron. Have a third one. No, I'm speaking to people. They told me they have 6 already. Now, how many vaccines are you going to take? Right? Like it works for, and I remember the guys, they met up with Boris Johnson and he says, I've done the science. The vaccine works for 2 weeks. This is the most ridiculous thing. I face COVID. The guy in the hospital saying, I face COVID every single day. I'm coming into contact with more COVID than I can come into contact with a vaccine. Why do I need to take a vaccine? You're kicking me out of the hospital when I'm in contact with COVID all day long. I don't know. So science has been thrown this whole curveball where they've been shown as much as you believe that you know, the Rabbi Shem can create one little thing. Now I remember we went out to Israel in February 2020 because my nephew had his wedding. And at the passport control, they had masks on. And I remember walking away from the passport control saying to my wife, they're mad. What's with the mask? No, people are coming in from China. What's talking about, right? A month and a half later, we shut down the entire country because we were all like, what are we going to do? This. And the bunch of, that was one, it was such a great patch. So now, instead of realizing as scientists that we really know so little. Science is now heralding we came up with a vaccine in 9 months. Well, you think the Rebbe can come up with another virus to undo it? You really believe that's it? Science scored this great victory that in 9 months they came when they're not, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu was so limited. That's what you believe? But that's the problem of science. That's the problem of Yavan. Yavan believed so much in their own kayach that the more they knew, the more they believed they've basically more or less cracked it. Okay? And that's really what science believes nowadays. If you speak to people like Richard Dawkins, maybe you probably shouldn't speak to him, right? That's some Stammer Russia, right? But you speak to Richard Dawkins. He believes that, science has gotten so far already, there's almost no point in discussing Bichlal whether there's a creator or not. Give another 2 or 3 years, we'll have worked out the whole history, everything. Do you know that every discovery that science makes brings with it more questions than the discovery itself brings answers? Well, you discover another thing about the skin, you discover another thing about the planets. Everything you discover, you're like, oh, we discovered that there was water. How did the water get there? What is the water? How can it stay there? Every time you find something, you have more questions. It's not like you discover, it's not like a puzzle, right? I have another piece, and 1.0, I have the whole puzzle. This is like the never-ending puzzle. Science, technology is like the never-ending. Every time I come up with another piece of the puzzle, it's like a puzzle that grows, right? If I put another piece, there's another layer that grows. Found another piece, another layer that grows. By the time I have 1,000 pieces, the puzzle is 10,000 pieces. When I have 10,000 pieces, the puzzle will be 1,000,000 pieces. So we look at it and we say, the more we know we have a Rabbi Shalom. We can know as much as we want to, but I know as somebody who is involved in learning, and I've known many people that have spent many, many years learning much, much more than I have. The more I learn, the more I realize how little I know. So when you're 18 or 20 and you finish a few Masechtas, you feel like the king of the world. Look at me. When you're 40 and you look at it and you say, even if I were to finish everything, how would I retain all that information? How would you finish everything? How could you? It's beyond. And there's more and more and more depths. And the more you learn, the more you realize that you haven't even scratched the surface. So Yaman says, we want to come up with progress. And the more progress we come up with, the more we understand what's going on. And the more we understand what's going on, the more we know that we're getting closer and closer to the goal of understanding the whole world. And then this is really what science says nowadays. The more we understand the world, the more we can get rid of the need for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? Because if I can explain through evolution, I can explain this and I can explain that. So why'd I have to say God came along? No, God came along. This just happened on its own. Even though evolution doesn't explain any of that. There are no real steps between them. There's no fossil record that shows that it's true. And even if you were to show it was true, where did the first bit come from? Where did everything come from? Which is the argument which is called first cause. You still can't answer that. It's like the famous mashal, the mashal that they tell the first train that came into Chelm, and they're all looking at this train and they're all like, what is this? We've never seen anything like this before in our lives. Huh? Where's the horses? Yeah, where's the horses? So the wise men of Chelm came forward and they said that we're going to figure this out. And the wise men of Chelm are looking at it and they're looking at it and they say, we figured it out. Oh, you figured it out? Yes. The 10th carriage is being pulled by the 9th carriage. The 9th carriage is being pulled by the 8th. The 8th one's being pulled by the 7th, the 7th by the 6th, 6 by 5, 5 by 4, 4 by 3, 3 by 2, and 2 by 1. So they said to them, yeah, but how's the front carriage moving? Hey. We figured out 90% of the problem over here. What are you getting upset with me for? 90% of the problem didn't figure anything out. Yes, I know that the second carriage is being pulled by the first one and the third carriage pulled by the second one. That's all true. But if I don't understand how the front carriage moves, then none of them move. I've still not explained it. And so you look at what HaKadosh Baruch Hu does in the world. We look at what HaKadosh Baruch Hu does. We look at what our learning. We look at everything that we know. And the more you know, the more you realize that actually, as much as I know, it's only a drop in the ocean. And the more you learn, the more you realize that your drop is actually smaller and smaller. And amongst Yavin, it was the other way around. The more I know, the more I believe I actually have it all figured out. When in reality, you're nowhere near figuring it out. And so Yavan believes that Kamus, look how much we know. Look how many libraries we filled up with books. Look at what we have. Look at the science that's created so far. And it's amazing what science has been able to do. But we say, yes, but look at how much is left that science doesn't know. You're showing me a huge library, but that's because 100% of the library would take up who knows how much space. So you have now 1% of the library, 5% of the library. So 5% of a massive library is still a lot of books, but it's still only 5% of a very, very big library. And Yavan says, we don't need the Rabbi Shalom. We don't need all of that. We got progress. We're figuring it out. We're going to get to the point where where HaKadosh Baruch Hu becomes unnecessary. And Klal Yisrael says, no, it's the other way around. The more you learn, the more you realize you need HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The deeper the secrets of science get, the more we realize that this could not have happened on its own. Because if you think, man is just, whatever, he's got an arm and can go like this, that's fine. But if you understand the structures of what goes into a shoulder, the joints, the tendons, the muscles, the movability, all the different bits and pieces you have in it. You have a shoulder that can move back and forth, and an elbow and fingers that have 3 different joints and can do whatever you want to, and you can play a guitar and you can play a piano and make beautiful music just by moving your hands around. The fact that happens we should marvel at and say to ourselves, my goodness, look at that chokhmah. That doesn't come on its own. That just didn't happen. There's something that put that into play. So we're like, no, but we understand now exactly how the joint moves and how this joint moves and that joint moves and how the mind sends a message through the neurological pathways. Yeah, but guess what? We still don't know why. How does the mind know to send a message? How do the different pathways know where to go? We still don't know. We know that there are pathways. We know that I can, from my brain, send an electrical signal to my mouth to talk to you, to my eyes to see you, to my hands to go like this. But how does my mind know that when I say stretch out the hand, it stretches out the hand? Maybe when my mind says stretch out the hand, I'm going to kick you. So how does my mind do that? We've not figured that out. You know that there are more electrical junctures in your brain than an entire island of Manhattan? And we believe that happened on its own. So the more you know, the more you should say, I don't know anything. The more you know, the more you should be humbled by what there is to see. My goodness me, science knows so much about the body. They should be humbled about the fact that this didn't happen on its own. And what they're doing is the opposite. We know so much, soon we'll know everything. The Rambam says, you'll never know everything. Don't get all excited about it. And even if you know everything, you'll still know nothing. And so that's the fight of Klal Yisrael against Yavan. Yavan says, we're going to teach you how to learn enough so that God becomes superfluous. God becomes unnecessary. And Klal Yisrael says, God never becomes unnecessary. Because the more you learn, the more you'll know that you have to come onto God. You can't get rid of God from your life. It's the other way around. The more I know, the more I need God in my life. The more I realize life without God is nothing. And Klal Yisrael looks at that and says, I'm not impressed with the Kamus. I'm not impressed with your amounts that you learned or that you know. I'm not impressed with that. Because in eichus, in percentages, in quality of learning, you have very, very little to show. And now it comes to a head when they fight for their right to believe. We want to fight for our right to believe that you will never rule this world. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu will always, always be the final ruler. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will always, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will always be the final word. So we fight for that. And we win. And the battle, the physical battle, is a battle that is fought about Kamus and Eichus. Rabim, many, B'yad me'atim. So how do few people win against many? How can few win against many? It doesn't make sense. It's logically doesn't make any sense, right? Unless you say, yeah, but if I have 10 little kids and 2 adults, so the 2 adults might be stronger than the 10 little kids. Well, I remember when I was in camp, we had once a tug of war, and we had 3 adults on one side and 20 5-year-old kids on the other side. And we were pulling as hard as we could, and they just started pulling, and they literally pulled us all the way through. We tried as hard as we added 1 or 2 more people. They just, because you add 25-year-olds one to the other to the next one, you end up with a very, very strong power. But sometimes you have Kamos, you have a lot of people versus the Eichus. Sometimes the Eichus will win out. And this is what the battle was. Rabim, many, beyond Ma'atim, in the hand of few. Tmeim, the ones who are Tamim, B'Atorim, Rishoim, in the hands of Tzaddikim. We keep on saying that what did Klal Yisrael have? They didn't have the Kamos. They didn't have the amount of people. But what they did have was the Eichus. They had the quality over there. And that brings us to the next, the Pach Shemen. The Pach Shemen, which is that part of oil, they come in and they start, we're now going to look for oil. What kind of oil? Pure oil. Oil that has the Eichus, oil that has the quality necessary for the Beis HaMikdash. And we find that oil and we light the oil, and the oil lights for 8 days. Now you might say that's not a very exciting miracle. And it's not a very exciting miracle. That's one side. On the other hand, even though it's not a very exciting miracle, what does it teach us? It teaches us a great lesson about Eichus, about quality. You know, you used to have, I don't know if you remember, used to have like these big 3-day candles. And then something came with candles like a quarter of the size as a 3-day candle. I'm like, how can you have a candle this big for a 3-day candle, a candle this big for a 3-day candle? Do you know what I'm talking about? When they came out the newer 3-day Ner Mitzvah candles, and you buy them on the tak, it lasts 3 days. So what's the difference? This is a much more efficient fuel. So I don't need as much of that fuel, so it should burn for 3 days. This is not as efficient a fuel. So therefore, I need a huge candle to burn for 3 days. But they both burn for 3 days. So how's that one so big and this one so small? It's the same kind. It gives you the same amount of light, just more efficiently. That's the Eichus, that's the quality of that light, the quality of the fuel that you use. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you have the quantity to only light for 1 day. But I can add to the quality of that and allow it to be super efficient. And suddenly you have light that lights for 8 days, even though it's supposed to light only for 1 day. Why? I just changed it around. Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do this? What's the nest? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sending us a message, and that's where the miracle comes from. It's not about quantity. You can have a small quantity of oil, only 1 day's worth, and it can burn 8 days. And you can have a massive quantity of oil, and it could just burn out. There's no way of knowing. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in charge of the Eichus, he's in charge of the quality. And what he's looking for is quality. He's not looking for that quantity. Quantity is not something we're impressed with. It's quality. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you take that oil, the little bit of oil, and you put a little bit of oil in and you light it. And it lights another day. And you're like, how does it light for so many days? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I can keep it lighting for longer than 8 days also. I'm not limited by 8 days because I can turn the quality of this light into kind of quality that will light forever also. And that's what we celebrate on Chanukah. So we started with the question, great miracles happen there. Great miracles? That's a great miracle? That's not impressive. It's only not impressive because you're looking at other things. You're looking to see, was there lots of booms and bangs and the people dying and hundreds of people get saved and was it, this great showing of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's power. You're looking for this bombastic show of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's power. Chanukah is not about that. Chanukah is not about the Kamos. Chanukah is about the Eichus, the quality. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is teaching you, I can add quality to anything. A little jar of oil, of quality oil, can light for those 8 days. And that's really what we need to look for. We need to try to strive for Eichus, quality. You do lots and lots and lots of mitzvahs. Some people do lots and lots of mitzvahs. But all the mitzvahs are done haphazardly and without thinking. And other people do fewer mitzvahs. But they really, really think about the mitzvah. Chanukah is there to teach us that thinking about the mitzvah, doing a mitzvah the way you're supposed to, with thought, before setting it up the way you can, really going into it, having the right kavanah, that's really where it's at. It's the quality of that mitzvah that we look up to, not the quantity. So that's the idea that I wanted to share with you. Great miracles did happen there. Mitzvah Shem, we should see many, many more great miracles. I'm sorry to all those on the Zoom that took slightly longer to get it going, but I'm glad we got it going anyway. Thank you very much for joining me, and Mitzvah Shem, look forward to seeing you next time. Right. Yeah, questions.
Strive to do what we are doing with quality rather than just do not one.
So I think we should try. I don't think we should try to do less. I think we should try to add quality to what we're doing. Sometimes, sometimes we will do more, and we won't be able to give it that quality. So if you say I could either, give you an example. You can daven once a day. Okay, I'm talking now to women. I'm talking about men, right? Men have a chiv to daven 3 times a day, whether they like it or not. So a guy says I can only daven shachris properly. If I daven shachris properly, I can't focus on mincha marav. Sorry, you got to come to mincha marav anyway. It's not up for sure yet. But I know women that will say, I can either daven one tefillah really, really well. I can daven a small amount of the davening. I don't know, brachas, Shema, Shemona Esrei, and really focus. Or I could go through all of Psukkah Zimra, and I could go over Bechesh Krishma, but I'll have to rush it. So which one of the two is more meaningful? If you have a choice, if you have to weigh it up, it might be better to say to yourself, you know what, if I only do the Shema, the brachas of Kriyat Shema, and Shemona Esrei, rather than the entire davening, but at least my davening has a bit of something to it, rather than saying, well, I davened the whole davening. What did you get out of it? Nothing. I said a whole bunch of words by spacing out, but I davened the whole thing. So did you really gain? Did you really gain by doing that? So that's really what you have to weigh up. Obviously, as I said, if there's obligations involved, you have to do them even if you do it without the quality and try to add the quality to it. But where you can sort of decide quality versus quantity, it might be worth doing less quantity and more quality if you have the choice.